Celebrating Christmas in a church in China requires 11 approvals from police and authorities of different levels. In some cases, police just block the entrance. Glossing over negative issues is a trick used by the CCP. From media reports to the words used, it takes creativity. Another heavy blow to China e-commerce giant Alibaba and its owner, Billionaire Jack Ma. This time, it came from China's central bank. Is Apple bowing to China's censorship? A former Apple employee says yes and claims he suffered for standing up to it. And Chinese spies are facing charges in Afghanistan. Some of them are in contact with a terrorist group. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now we look into how Chinese people celebrate Christmas. Under the Chinese regime, atheism is promoted as China's state religion. As a result, no official holidays are permitted to have religious backgrounds. The rule stands regardless of whether they're based on Eastern tradition like Buddhism or Western like Christianity. Because of the rule, Christmas in China serves as more of a shopping festival than a religious holiday. Christians who try to celebrate the special day often face many difficulties. In one photo from this year's Christmas Eve, decorations had been hung on the gate of a Catholic church in Beijing. But just in front of the gate, a line of police officers holding anti-riot equipment were standing guard. A notice for the area also announced that all local activities were suspended. Another Catholic church, this time in Wuhan city inside Jiangsu province, appears to have been granted permission to celebrate. That's after it received 11 red badges from various departments of the Chinese Communist Party. That means the church had to get permission from at least 11 sources in order to celebrate Christmas. 5 of them are part of the community the church belongs to. One is a police-like organization called Chengguan, also referred to as urban administrators. The other 4 are responsible for other departments: surveillance, the Communist Party Committee, political orientation, and the propaganda office. These 5 monitor everything that happens inside the community. The other 6 sources are police or security officers of different levels. In recent years, the CCP has boycotted all Western holidays, including Christmas. The order came in 2017. But photos and videos posted online show people across the country held parades and other activities to boycott Christmas. In one picture, a banner reads, "Christmas, get out of China." We cannot verify if these activities were hosted voluntarily or required by the regime. But in China, it's widely known that protests are only possible with authorities' permission. Officials also frequently organize protests, aiming to influence public opinion. Christmas boycott measures also vary from place to place. In the eastern province of Shandong, Christmas cards and decorations have been removed from shops. And in the southwestern Guizhou province, students are prohibited from celebrating Christmas Eve and other foreign holidays. In some universities, students are even required to change their photos on social media if they feature items like Santa Claus hats. The year 2020 is drawing to a close. Chinese netizens made a summary of new terms created by the Chinese Communist Party this year. The CCP does this to disguise the real negative meaning. For example, price increases are called holiday effects, even when the price increases have nothing to do with holiday shopping. Layoffs are called supplying talents to society because the laid-off employees won't work in the company anymore and therefore go back to society. Electricity restriction is called orderly usage of electricity. Floods are called water area expansion. Bankruptcies are called enterprise dormancy, and the poor are called potential rich people. Farmers are called new industrial workers. By altering the terms and their meaning, the CCP makes negative situations sound positive or neutral. This means the CCP can avoid taking any blame or responsibility for the people negatively impacted and avoid a bad reputation. The most important thing this year was the outbreak of the CCP virus. For this, the CCP had also made a new term. The CCP underreported the death cases in China, covered up the true situation of the pandemic by controlling the media, silenced whistleblowers, and manipulated the World Health Organization. The purpose of this was first introduced by a CCP spokeswoman. It was referred to as creating the correct collective human memory. The CCP did not start to beautify negative terms or shift the focus in this way just this year. For many years, unemployment has been called leaving the working place, and they label criticizing the CCP as hurting the feelings of the Chinese people. With this, the CCP rouses people's anger against the critics, even though the critics are the ones defending the rights of the Chinese people. It also manages to shift the focus away from the CCP's wrongdoing. Now we look to a fire that broke out in southwest China, Chongqing City. A fire broke out in a residential high-rise building early one evening over the weekend. The flames ran through more than 20 floors and reached the top of the building. According to Chinese media, the fire was caused by the burning of a canopy. Hours later, the authorities claim nobody was injured or died at the accident. Chinese state-run media have not disclosed any details or any losses. So far, the few media reports in China about this issue are all extremely short. A report says the relevant information is subject to official notification. Some Chongqing residents felt relieved at hearing that and posted on social media, "It is so fortunate there were no casualties in the fire." But a netizen replied to the post, questioning the authorities' narrative. They wrote, "Who on earth told you nobody died or was injured in the fire?" Almost a year ago, on the first day of 2020, a big fire broke out in another high-rise in the same city. Authorities also said nobody died or got injured. Netizens ridiculed this and said it should be a miracle. China's central bank is asking Ant Group to shake up its lending and other consumer finance operations. It's the latest blow to its billionaire founder and controlling shareholder, Jack Ma.
China is turning up the heat on the country's tech giant Alibaba, its lending arm Ant Group, and billionaire Jack Ma. On Sunday, the central bank announced it had asked Ant to shake up its lending and consumer finance operations. This is just the latest volley from Beijing, aimed at bringing Ma's sprawling financial empire to heel, after he publicly criticized the group's regulatory system in October for stifling innovation. Those comments are said to have prompted Chinese regulators to suspend Ant's IPO in Hong Kong and Shanghai in November. Ant was launched in 2004 and is China's biggest digital payments app with some 130 million monthly users. Over time, it has expanded into loans, insurance, and more. And at $37 billion, its IPO had been set to be the world's largest stock market debut. Just last week, Chinese authorities also launched an antitrust investigation into Ma's e-commerce platform Alibaba. On the latest measures, Ant said in a statement it would establish a rectification working group and fully implement regulatory requirements. Representatives from the company met officials from the People's Bank of China over the weekend. Regulators are said to have accused Ant of poor governance, squeezing out competitors and harming consumer interests.
Ant Group is backed by China e-commerce giant Alibaba. It's innovated people's way of life in China, operating retail, business-to-business, and consumer-to-consumer platforms. But its dominance has also drawn attention from authorities.
They are taking business like deposit and loans away from the big commercial banks. And all these internet companies are privately owned. And you are threatening the survival of the state-owned commercial banks.
Luan says politics could also be behind the move.
We have access to hundreds of million people, and the government has no control, virtually no control over it. They actually threaten the direct rule of the Chinese Communist Party.
Lun says with the regime's tight control, the era of free growth for Ma's empire is over.
Their growth actually will be restricted by the government. The government will decide what you can do and what you cannot do. And in that case, when you lose your business freedom, I think the future is much, much dimmer.
The Chinese e-commerce giant is listed on the U.S. stock market. Its shares dropped to their lowest level since June over the weekend, losing $90 billion in market value. A Chinese court handed a 4-year jail term on Monday to a citizen journalist who reported from Wuhan during the peak of the city's coronavirus outbreak. Flora Bradley-Watson reports.
A Chinese citizen journalist who covered the coronavirus outbreak in Wuhan has been jailed for 4 years. 37-year-old Chang Chan was found guilty on Monday of picking quarrels and provoking trouble, her lawyer said. Chang's first-hand accounts of crowded hospitals, empty streets and interviews with residents painted a more dire picture of the situation in Wuhan than the official narrative. But her channel on YouTube also got her in the crosshairs of Chinese authorities. She was detained in mid-May and went on hunger strike in June, court documents reveal. Her lawyers told the court police strapped her arms down and force-fed her through a tube. By December, she was suffering headaches, giddiness, stomachache, low blood pressure and a throat infection. Requests for bail before Monday's trial were denied. There was tight security outside the court in Shanghai, but one man turned up to show her support before he was escorted away.
I came here to try and see her. I went there just now, but the staff told me it's not allowed, especially not in a criminal case.
Chung is one of several citizen journalists who have run into trouble for reporting on Wuhan. China has come under fire for its early handling of the pandemic, with Beijing accused of failing to warn the world about how bad the situation was. Since the first cases of COVID were detected in Wuhan last December, the disease has spread worldwide, infecting more than 80 million people and killing over 1.7 million.
A former Apple employee is accusing the company of bowing to China's censorship. He claims he suffered for speaking out against the practice. NTD's Juliet Song has the details.
A former Apple employee is suing the tech giant. He believes the company fired him for approving an app that criticizes Beijing. The story goes back to 2018. At the time, Chu Pham was working for Apple as an app reviewer in California. His main job is to reject or accept an application based on the company's policy. In the complaint, Pham alleges that he approved an iPhone app created by a Chinese dissident, Guo Wengui. The app publishes content that criticizes Beijing, and Guo himself is known for accusing high-level communist leaders of corruption. He's on Beijing's wanted list. Pham states that after he approved the app, the Chinese government contacted Apple and asked the company to remove it from the App Store. Apple then had an internal investigation and called Pham into a meeting. The complaint says Apple's supervisors said the app is critical of the Chinese government and therefore should be removed from the App Store. Pham argued the app doesn't violate company policies. It mainly publishes claims of corruption against the Chinese regime and should remain in the store as a matter of free speech. Pham added removing the app under China's pressure would be caving to censorship. He claims supervisors couldn't give justification of removing the app based on technical or content criteria. It's not the first time that Apple's accused of bowing to China's censorship. In 2019, Apple pulled an app that Hong Kong protesters used to track local police activities. The company said it removed the app because it's a risk to public safety. An analysis from a US-based nonprofit has another discovery. It says removing apps at the request of Chinese authorities is a regular practice for Apple. And of the over 3,000 apps disappeared from its China App Store, almost a third are about human rights topics, such as Hong Kong protests. Apple fired Pham in early 2019. The company said it's because he didn't meet the job expectations. Pham believes it has to do with him approving the app. He alleges that Apple discriminated against him to appease the Chinese government. China is Apple's third largest market by revenue. Apple didn't immediately respond to a request for comment. Pham's lawyer told NTD they're now waiting for a trial. Juliet Song, NTD News.
Now we look to Afghanistan. With more than 2,000 U.S. troops set to leave Afghanistan by January, Beijing reportedly sent out spies to expand its influence. 10 Chinese nationals are facing espionage charges and are accused of operating a terror cell in Afghanistan. Some of them were found to be in contact with terrorist group the Haqqani Network. The organization previously kidnapped U.S. soldiers and attacked U.S. and NATO armed forces. Indian media outlet the Hindustan Times reported that Li Yangyang has worked as a spy for China since this summer. A counterterrorism official said Li allegedly gathered information about Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and members of a Chinese minority group known as the Uyghurs. Sha Hun, a Chinese woman who runs a local restaurant, was also arrested this month on similar grounds. Afghan officials found bombs at her home. Afghan officials have called Beijing's decision to send out spies as a betrayal of trust and a violation of international norms. Officials say they'll consider pardoning the alleged spies if the Chinese regime formally apologizes. A U.S. official says popular Chinese TV maker TCL put backdoors on all of its TV sets, potentially to spy on users. The firm takes about a 15% share in the U.S. retail market. Here's DHS Acting Secretary Chad Wolf at a Heritage Foundation event last week.
DHS flags instances where Chinese companies illicitly collect data on American consumers to steal intellectual property. CCP-aligned firms rake in tremendous profits as a result. As an example, DHS is reviewing entities such as the Chinese manufacturer TCL. This year, it was discovered that TCL incorporated backdoors into all its TV sets, exposing users to cyber breaches and data exfiltration.
Wolf says TCL gets state support from the Chinese Communist Party to compete in the global electronics market. It helped make TCL the world's third largest TV maker by market share. According to Chinese media reports, TCL receives tens of millions of dollars in state subsidies every year. It's also involved in China's military industry and development, according to a Chinese magazine. Wolf says the DHS will soon issue a notice warning businesses against using data services and equipment from firms with ties to the Chinese regime. An NBA sports executive who was under fire for his pro-Hong Kong Twitter post is standing his ground. NTD's Christina Kim brings us the details.
NBA's Daryl Morey is doubling down on his support for the people of Hong Kong. Back in October 2019, then Houston's Rocket general manager Daryl Morey posted an image on Twitter that said, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." It was in reference to protests over an extradition bill that meant Hong Kongers could be sent to mainland China for trial. Many feared it would further threaten the one country, two systems framework that grants unique freedoms to Hong Kong. But the backlash was strong. Many in China saw his pro-Hong Kong stance as a direct affront to the Chinese regime, and the NBA suffered financially as a result. The response from Morey's NBA family was mixed. Commissioner Adam Silver said he supports free speech, and Morey received no disciplinary action. But the Rockets owner distanced himself from Morey. The NBA released a statement saying it was regrettable the tweet offended fans in mainland China. Even NBA player LeBron James criticized Morey's post, saying there are ramifications for what people say and that he wasn't educated on the situation at hand. Morey recently spoke with ESPN about the fallout from his post. He said he was extremely concerned about the safety of his wife and two children who were receiving threats. But when asked if he regrets his decision to support the Hong Kong protests, he answered, quote, "I'm very comfortable with what I did." Morey resigned from the Rockets in October 2020 and joined the Philadelphia 76ers in November as president of basketball operations. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Chinese people from around the globe are renouncing their membership to the CCP. The head of a global service center helping people to quit calls it an unstoppable movement. NTD's Dawn Ma gives us more on the details.
A trend years in the making is gathering steam among Chinese people. That is, renouncing membership to the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. Nearly 370 million Chinese people have quit the CCP and its affiliated organizations, like the Communist Youth League and the Young Pioneers. Those are state-run groups that aim to teach communist theory and loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party to Chinese children. One unique service center is helping people make the change. The Global Service Center for Quitting the CCP helps people quit the party, often by helping them choose a pseudonym to protect their safety and adding them to a database of names who have also renounced support for the regime. After quitting, they'll also receive a certificate from the center. Some of the center's volunteers shared their experiences with us about their efforts to help people quit the party. Canadian volunteer Ms. Zhang says she would often receive phone calls from mainland Chinese college students. Some of them told her they had been paid by regime officials to insult and criticize her over the phone. But after she told them about torture practices used by the regime against prisoners of conscience, like murder via forced organ harvesting, the students were so moved that they quit the CCP instead.
I personally made a phone call to a hospital and pretended to ask how long my relative would have to wait to have a kidney transplant. They said it depends on how much money you spend. The fastest is 4 hours, or 1 week, or 2 weeks. The longest is 2 months. It depends on how much you are willing to pay. Later, I told the students about this.
She also told the students that after she revealed that she was pretending, The doctor panicked and even threatened to remove her organs.
You doctors are important to people, but your scalpel has become a butcher's knife. The doctor became hysterical and shouted at me. He said, "Who are you? Tell me who you are. Do you dare to come here? If you dare to come here, you will be harvested alive." I told the students this over the phone as I cried.
Another volunteer tells us she's seen overseas Chinese people being influenced by the CCP's propaganda. She described how some elderly Chinese people called her recently, looking for help in renouncing their membership to the Chinese Communist Party. They said their sons and daughters who live overseas refused to help them quit.
The parents said that the Chinese Communist Party is evil. They sent their kids to the US to study. Inside China, their kids hadn't been that influenced by the CCP. But being in the United States, they have been greatly influenced. The CCP's brainwashing tactics are too powerful.
Ms. Zhao also explained she would receive calls from Chinese law enforcement officials. Some of them expressed regret for helping the CCP. The head of the service center, Yi Rong, told us that the center endured interference from regime officials. But she says that means the Communist Party is afraid of what the centers are doing. There are more than 90 million CCP members, 130 million young pioneers, and 100 million Communist Youth League members currently in China. The number of combined members totals to less than the population in China because the regime removes a person's membership after a certain length of time. But these people can still renounce their membership through the center's program. Reporting by Don Ma, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.